Welcome. We're into Chapter 5, Consumer Behaviour. If you're watching this, this will be watched the week before the break, and you will have time enough over the break to consume lots and lots of chocolates and Easter eggs. So, consumer behaviour, one of the bigger theories in marketing. In fact, some people will say it is the biggest theory for what it does cover and touch on through the different concepts discussed in this chapter. Wide-reaching. It's important to go through this chapter because you need to understand how consumers behave to marketing actions to help you understand and decide what marketing activities you may want to undertake as part of your marketing plan. So let's get into it. We've moved down the ladder now, working our way through the course. We're up to understanding consumers' value needs. And the text this week focuses on a lot of theory. It is one of the biggest theory weeks we cover, so we'll go through some definitions to understand what a consumer is and a consumer market. Pretty much the consumer is the ultimate user, some people will say the end user, of goods, ideas and services, and the consumer market is the market made up of all those people. Alright, so what is consumer behaviour then? Should follow on pretty simply from that previous slide on definitions. And consumer behaviour is the dynamic interaction of effect and cognition, behaviour, and the environment by which human beings conduct the exchange aspects of their lives. On top of that, we have the external influences on people, the internal influences on people, which lead to the decision-making process, which then leads to the action, which is in marketing what we're all about and what we're trying to achieve. The decision-making process itself, we'll go through it a bit more detail shortly, but it's the process by which we make a decision as consumers, and it can involve very complex cognitive activity or be based very, very simply on a learned response from past experiences as a consumer. So there are some products which you can buy in seconds and others take you a long time to consume and buy, and this is where it comes into understanding the decision-making process. Now, everyone's different, so what can take some people seconds to buy may take other people a lot longer. So it's about understanding these decision-making processes in context of who we are as individual and unique consumers. So one of the bigger theories in consumer behaviour is this one, the EKB theory, named after the initials of the lead authors on the paper which came up with this idea and concept. A bit like IKEA, where it's all initials named after different parts relevant to the founder of the company. But here we have the EKB, and you can see what we should be concerned about is the decision process in the middle here. I'm not too sure if you can see it if I move my arrow up. So you can see now the decision process here. So problem recognition, search, alternative evaluation, purchase, and outcomes. And that's the process starts all over again. Now, here's the thing about the EKB model. This is the more expanded model, the better one to learn, in my opinion, for the decision-making process. For this chapter, I'd rather you learn this one than the more concise ones which follow. Linked into how we go through a decision-making process, though, is involvement. How involved we really feel or we think we should feel about a product. So we have low involvement to high involvement, relevant to risk to the consumer. So something that has a low risk, though, buying a $2 product in a $2 store, low risk usually, unless it's a birthday card, let's say, in which case has a higher risk, in this case social risk, of going bad. So you want to make sure it is a good card, so you might spend more time on it even though it may cost $2. So involvement theory dictates how involved we are in a consumption sense with buying and purchasing and then using a product. As I said, linked into that is risk. Now, perceived risk, it's all in the consumer's head usually. It's all in your head. So the perceived risk is the belief that choice of a product has potentially negative consequences. So we fear the most is getting it wrong as a consumer, probably because we've had bad experiences ourselves in a consumption situation, and therefore we need to be really focused on minimizing the perceived risk to us because of any prior negative experiences with a product. So some of the factors which increase risk is things like financial costs, so whether it's expensive or not, whether it's complex or hard to understand, so the complexity of something, which is usually the case with technology products, and any potential social rejection. So getting a haircut, there's a high perceived risk in a haircut for most people, unless you're a bloke, because of the risk which may occur to us socially. Now, the level of involvement just talked about before, about low and high, we can see here it relates to risk itself. Some good examples to look at with this slide. So low involvement, for example, box of cereal. And then, of course, high involvement could be a new car. Now, it could vary, as I said to you. So some people can buy a new car very quickly, and other people take a long time to buy a box of cereal. So it can be dependent upon the actual consumer themselves and in the context of the consumer. This leads on to understanding how, therefore, some people may take what's called the central route to buying a product. So ELM means elaboration likelihood model. I got there in the end. And what it means is that you take every step in the decision-making process before you make that final decision on whether to buy the product or not. The periphery means you skip a few steps, so you go on the edges, you shortcut basically parts of the decision-making process because it's low involvement, low risk. Therefore, you're not going to spend too much time because you don't have that much time in the world, and you'll skip the steps and get on to buying the product more quickly. The extended problem solving versus habitual decision making. So in other words, getting back into our examples of the new car, so high involvement, high risk, to low involvement, low risk product of our box of cereal. You can see a bit more on the theories which now are involved in consumer behaviour, which we as marketers can alter and use. So we not just have risk here, we also have information processing, so how much information might be required to make a consumer get an interest or desire about a product, and then the learning model involved in terms of what sort of model might help people understand about our product and our brand. And then you can see finally the required marketing actions. So some of the things we may want to work on to try and assist the brand in developing a relationship, but also getting sales from the consumer. So this is the concise decision-making process. It's linked into the EKB model, which is figure 5.1. So the EKB model basically, as I said to you before, this is the central tree or the spine of the decision-making process. So this is the concise decision-making process. It narrows and excludes all the other choices the EKB model does, just to focus on what you need to understand about how consumers make a decision. So we've got some examples here about a car, and we go through the problem recognition all the way down to post-purchase valuation. So it's linked into that previous slide on the EKB model, which though lets you know and understand about all the external and internal influences upon Brendan making his decision about the car, which we have as the example here. So now we'll go through each of these steps in a bit more detail so you understand how the model may work in practice. And so, oops, went 2 slides too quick. So just on problem recognition itself, we have the consumer's current state, and then what happens is you identify that there's now a desired or ideal state which you don't have, which leads to the problem recognition itself. So sometimes marketers may be accused of triggering this. For example, is your TV really bad and old? How about getting a new one? And so we can be accused therefore of triggering this whole process and therefore excessive consumption with a product. Okay, so moving on from once we've identified we have a problem, we may want to go into an information search. So we start considering what information do we need to help us solve this problem in a marketing sense. So we start to ask all these different external and internal references and influences for help with the information search. So we may use advertising or news stories or Google, for example, for the external part of it. And internally, we could try and use our own memory and experiences with past product purchases and consumption in this category. So you can see here, it can be very, very broad and very wide, because remember back to that theory I talked about with involvement, this is where we can skip steps on the central or peripheral route of persuasion. So central, we'll go through all of them, but if we take the periphery, we might skip steps like information search because, for example, it's a can of Coke, you're thirsty, you'll just buy that can in front of you because you know the brand, you know the product, low risk, you won't think much about it. It's right there, buy it quickly, so you'll skip steps. So it's important to understand with the information search, in fact, all the steps we'll look at in this decision-making process, that it's very contextual to the consumption and to the consumer. Step 3, looking at the evaluation of alternatives. Love the sound of the renovations above my head. Being ANU, of course, we only play renovations when classes are in progress, not when they're not. So, evaluation of alternatives. Back to the lecture. Consumers will use an evaluation criteria. So some people call this heuristics, where they may come up with a list of important features they're looking at with a product which are not negotiable. So for example, buying a digital camera, perhaps it could be the quality of the pictures through the megapixels or the zoom, for example, or even what batteries in the camera itself. Those things may be the most important features you're looking for in the product. Therefore, you're not prepared to make any negotiations or settle for substitutions in those categories. So it becomes your evaluation of the alternatives using your heuristics or decision-making rules. So what marketers try and do is try and tap into that by raising awareness of one of those key features of the product to make you more likely then to purchase their product over someone else's. Once a market has done that, we have then the evaluation narrowed down into what your choices might be. So you might start off with the evaluation alternatives could be 5. You might get to the choice now between 3. And so what you're trying to do is make sure you get the best product for you on a value basis. It can be done on the simple rule of price equals quality. Some people are very brand loyal, or there could be other factors such as country of origin, which may come into understanding how you make your decision on product choice. So, post-purchase evaluation. Once you've bought your product, made your choice, now you get the chance to evaluate it. It's important to understand here that the purchase itself may actually occur before you consume the product. A good example is a house. If you ever buy a house, or any real estate for that matter, or even a car, more often than not, you'll buy the product before you take ownership or possession of the property and start to experience it and consume the product. So your dissonance will be starting already, and your evaluation will be starting already before you've even started to consume and use the product. This is the nature of our human mind and how it links into our purchase behavior. So post-purchase evaluation occurs after the post-purchase, where the consumer evaluates whether it was a good choice or not. We have satisfied or dissatisfied, and then leads on to how that may influence your next decision made as a consumer with a product. So this is what we'll spend a lot more time now talking about for the rest of this wonderful YouTube lecture, which I'm sure you're watching. Maybe hit pause by now. Maybe it's a good time to hit pause after this slide to go off and grab yourself a cuppa, /coffee, /beverage, treat, whatever. And come back and we'll cover this theory for the rest of the video online here. And you can see the influences on decision making are both internal and external. So internal, we have perception, motivation, learning, attitudes, personality, age groups, and lifestyle. Moving up to situational influences from the physical environment and time, and social influences of culture, subculture, social class, and group memberships. This all influences our decision process, which then influences our purchase. Now, how it happens is, as I've said before with this week, contextual to your consumption situation and to who you are as a consumer. Okay, so it's a good time now to hit pause before we start this talk on influences on decision making. So if you need to hit pause, I'd recommend you do so right now. Okay, well, let's get into perception. Now, perception is understanding how we perceive things as consumers. So the important thing in marketing is to try and make a consumer believe the message they're seeing is in fact the reality of the product and the brand. So what we try and do, we expose you to the message, you need to pay attention to it, and that's the critical part of any message. is the part where you need to pay attention to the entire message. So therefore you interpret it in the way the marketer wants you to, which then can influence your behavior as a consumer and of course lead to that final purchase. So making you change your perception of a product or brand is usually far easier than changing your attitude towards a product or brand, and marketers therefore work on this a lot more than changing attitudes. Seeing how this works on a theory side, exposure, attention, interpretation. It is a model. There are a lot of models and theories in this week which relate to consumer behavior. It's important to understand how they work because they do touch on other weeks. For example, what we're doing right now obviously relates to advertising, which we'll cover later on in the semester. Now, this is Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which relates to motivation. It's another big theory for this week. And you can see at the very, very bottom, the way Maslow's hierarchy of needs operates is that we have a need at the very bottom we try and satisfy. And then once we satisfy the lower order needs, we can satisfy the higher order needs. It's a great theory. Some people put it down. Others still love it. I'm in the camp of it's not a bad theory at all. I think it's quite a good and solid theory, but not everyone does like it because some people, for example, say that people will just target ego needs straight away. But it's important to look at here how this theory applies with motivation and what motivates someone to buy something. It's a really important question to ask when you do any marketing at all is what is the key motivation for the consumer to buy something, and can we influence that motivation through a theory such as Maslow's hierarchy of needs? It's good to see in practice when it happens. Moving on to learning. So learning can be into two categories here of behavioral learning and cognitive learning. So this is where we try and get you to change your behavior in a longer period of time and also try and change attitudes as well. So we focus on how behavior could be changed by external events. So anything external to the consumer, for example, recessions or talk about higher unemployment in the economy, might make people change how they see and learn about products. So it stresses the internal mental processes we go through as consumers, where we become active problem solvers and seekers. Moving on to these two theories explained a bit more, we have behavioral learning. You may have heard about classical conditioning, where one stimulus is paired with another through repeated association. So Pavlov's dog, where he rang the bell, the dog came for the food, and then he rang the bell other times, the dog would come along and expect to find the food there, but didn't, because it had been trained and conditioned. When the bell rang, there was food. Operant conditioning is learning as a result of feedback, either rewards or punishment. So what we try and do is teach you, for example, to use your Flybuys card. If you do so, we'll give you a discount at the point of sale or the checkout, and therefore we'll teach you that there's a reward involved for using your loyalty card. Bit of theory behind it, you see. Now, stimulus generalization is the last part we'll look at here with behavioral learning. Is the transfer of existing associations to a similar stimulus, for example, a product line extension. So what we're trying to do is if you've had past experience with a brand and we do a brand extension, then you'll associate your past experiences with the new brand. So it's really important if you do a brand extension where that may trigger and kick into it all. So looking at classical conditioning in advertising, I'd like to be there right now. That's New Zealand. In the South Island, it's trying to get you to associate an image like that with past experience, perhaps of the brand or on holiday, to make you have a preference and liking towards going on a holiday one day soon in New Zealand. Notice the lack of orcs and other characters from Lord of the Rings. Quite good if you're on a holiday. Attitude. So an attitude is a lasting evaluation of a person, object or issue. So it's a lot longer here what we're looking at. Because it's longer term, it's a lot harder to really affect. And so we have this theory and model which applies to changing attitudes within a consumer. An attitude has three components, which is the ABC model, which stands for affect, behavior, and cognition. So looking how that may work in terms of theories, relating to personality, which is the next big one we talk about. which is the psychological characteristics that consistently influence the way a person responds to a situation or his or her environment. So, for example, the previous theory about cognition, we may try and change how you think about something, or the brand personality itself, make it seem more alive, so therefore you attach personality traits to the product which match those of your own personality traits. And we have a bit of theory here on different types of personality traits you may have within you as a consumer. Now, the thing to remember, these traits may also vary with your consumption situation. For example, you could be an expert in technology products, which means that maybe you're an innovator when it comes to technology, but then when it comes to food, maybe you're not so positive and confident about your ability with food. So therefore your self-confidence when it comes to the food category could be a lot lower than perhaps what it might be for you being a technology part of a consumer. So the self, I can see what you're thinking. A person's self-concept is their attitude towards the self. So the self-concept is composed of a mixture of beliefs about one's abilities, behavior and feelings, both positive and negative. And so marketers try to create brand personalities which relate to your own personality, as I said before the previous slide. So, Nike saying just do it, for example, they want you to be the sort of person who says that or believes that yourself. You'll just do it. If you feel something's right, you're just going to do it anyway because it feels good. So Nike as a brand try and tap into that type of personality within the consumer. Here's one very Australian brand. This is R.M. Williams. R.M. Williams themselves like to be seen as a rural, regional brand tied into, cowboys, as it were, cattlemen in Australia or farmers in Australia. So R.M. Williams is a very, very popular brand in Australia in rural and regional areas. So if you like to see yourself as someone who identifies with country people or being a farmer or from the land, then you'll probably be more likely to buy R.M. Williams products. Okay, age group. Now, be careful on age. That's the first thing I'm going to say. Never judge books by their covers. I met some very, very young people who can't use technology and some very, very old people who are more proficient at it than most people I know. So be very, very careful. So it says here that age can influence purchase behavior. It is contextual to the environment and to the individual and to the product being purchased. So be very, very careful about this theory. In terms of family life cycle, that is more relevant. So for example, if you have a couple kids or one kid or whatever it happens to be, then what they're saying here is that the age of the child will also influence what you might buy and purchase as a consumer and how you might purchase a product as well. So the influence of that child on your purchasing behavior can be important. Lifestyles. Our lifestyles are constantly changing, hence why marketing is a fluid and dynamic discipline, because we as people are constantly changing our lifestyles due to changing circumstances in our own lives. For example, you get a promotion, you have more money, you'll change your lifestyle a bit to reflect your increased spending power. So looking at how markets trying to capitalize on that, we try and tie into someone's activities, interests or opinions. Again, looking at the rise of social media, lifestyles is very much linked into psychographics as a segmentation variable, which we'll talk about next week. But how then we try and tie into how you're thinking is that we try and say, look, I understand that you see yourself or think of yourself as being someone who enjoys an active outdoor lifestyle. Therefore, as a camping and outdoor brand, I can match and meet your needs. So hopefully it understands a bit more about lifestyles. Now, there are studies out there you can do to try and ascertain what type of consumer you are. This is VALS, Values, Attitude and Lifestyle Survey. You can do it online. You can see what sort of person you come up as being. I think there's Facebook studies or surveys you can do. Be warned though, they do keep your information. They are a profit-based company. Think twice about doing it if that's an issue for you. But they're good to look at in terms of understanding how marketing organizations are trying to perceive us as consumers and how they may categorize us on a value and lifestyle survey system. So, moving away from that psychology talk a bit more, into now situational influences, which you may find a lot more relevant to you and your context, and a little bit easier to understand. Situational influences are important in the context of when, where, and how you shop, and therefore we can try and influence your purchases you make in a retail setting and environment. So we have the physical environment, so for example, the store layout, displays and atmospherics, and things like time even. So the time of day you buy something. They always say you never go retail shopping when you're hungry, because just before dinner, for example, when you finish work, because you're more likely to impulse spend because you're hungry. You'll buy more food products than you might normally buy, or need for that matter, because you're hungry. So I understand how that works in the physical environment. We can play around the physical environment itself. We can try and make things arousing, like think about poker machines, the lights and the sounds. They're trying to make you excited. Other places try to make it dull. So if you go and see a firm of accountants, be very, very quiet, because it'll be consistent with the brand of the accounting organisation. Some people work on pleasure, so if you go to a holiday resort, you want it to be nice and pleasurable and have fun. And of course, pleasant versus unpleasant. So sometimes you try and make things pleasant for the consumer, of course, but other times it might be unpleasant for the consumer because you need to get people in and out very quickly, like in a fast food environment. So McDonald's for a long time there, and they still do in fact, have very hard seats because they don't want you to be too comfortable. They want you to enjoy your food, but then after a certain amount of time to find the chairs uncomfortable, the environment unpleasant, and for you to leave. So other consumers who walk into the store can have somewhere to sit. Now, making the time is money, as they say. So the time of day, the season, and how much available time all affect your decision-making process. So if you're rushed with a decision, then you'll probably find yourself unhappy with that purchase being made. So the time of day could be morning, afternoons, or evenings when you purchase a product. Time of season could refer to something like we're having here in Australia right now, which is Easter. So we'll find hot cross buns available, Easter eggs available, and you'll be in the mood to buy them. Come a month from today, if you're watching this video, and I'm talking about Easter eggs, you probably won't find that many in the stores at all because Easter has passed, and it'll seem a little strange buying overpriced chocolate when it's no longer Easter time. Okay, so culture. Looking at culture, it can be important to some people. It's the values and beliefs and customs and tastes practiced by a group of people. And in that we can have whatever culture and norms you may have. So for example, Australian norm on Australia Day is to have a barbie. Yeah mate, straight. So have a sausage, enjoy a lamington or 2 or 3, and a cup of tea. That's part of the Aussie culture. And of course, even nowadays, Tim Tams. Perfect in winter time. So whatever culture you belong to, though, will have different values and beliefs, which will dictate how you might buy products as a consumer and when you might buy them. And within culture, we can have subcultures, which could be based around religious beliefs or ethnic groupings or regional groups, or even on sporting or leisure activities, which may dictate what sort of brands you may purchase. So for example, if you play a lot of football/soccer, then you may find yourself using Adidas shoes a lot because the rest of your team does. So that subculture will support and reinforce your purchasing behavior of that brand. But if you went outside and bought another brand, perhaps they don't look at you the right way or the same way. So it can be important. On to social class, which is another influence upon people. So maybe you identify with a different social class. It can be based on income or family background or how you see yourself anyway. And some people can see themselves differently to maybe what others may see them. So you might think of yourself as being middle class, for example, but other people may look at you and think, wow, you're quite well off. I think you're upper class. So it can be very, very contextual. Group memberships, I talked about it just briefly before when it came on to subculture. So if you're part of a group, for example, a sporting club or a recreational club or another club, then we call it a reference group, and then it can reference, it's called a reference group because you refer to them about any decisions you may need to make about purchasing products in categories relevant to what you're looking at with that reference group. So you'll refer to them, you'll ask them questions, and they can be important in deciding what you may end up buying or not buying. And finally, opinion leaders. We're getting close to the end now. We're 32 minutes in, or roughly, judging on the clock, I'm looking at it anyway. But looking at opinion leaders, these are people we'll touch on again when we do promotion, but you're looking at people who can influence the opinion of others, so therefore they act as a virtual reference group, as it were, because they may influence your opinion and might be people you might refer to for help or assistance or information on buying a product. So, for example, celebrities are seen as opinion leaders. So this is why companies and brands will give products to celebrities, because what they're trying to do is, at the end of the day, influence your behavior and try and get you to buy one of their products because you like that celebrity or opinion leader. Gender roles. Coke Zero is a good example of how we can use gender in consumer behavior. So some people call it Bloke's Coke because Coke Zero is all black and was designed primarily as a product to appeal to males, because Diet Coke was seen as a product which appealed to women. So therefore, Coke designed a product which would appeal to men, because men, through market research, were saying that drinking Diet Coke was a bad look for some of them. So hence Coke came up with the idea of Coke Zero. So we can have product categories out there which might be specific to gender and might be specific to how you perceive yourself in that category, in that way. Okay, so on to e-commerce. This is really out of date. It's now up with social media. A lot of consumer-to-consumer e-commerce. Still looking at the internet and how it's changed, and the sort of use of technology on the internet now, but also these concepts of social media and how we use social media platforms to get information about products. So in other words, there are virtual online reference groups which we now use to get advice and ideas and recommendations about products. So it's important to consider social media and how it influences us as consumers. So that brings us to the end of a very, very lengthy lecture on consumer behavior theory. I have only touched on the very briefest parts of this theory, which the textbook does as well. So we'll cover some of the key points now you need to have recalled about today. So number one, define consumer behavior and explain the reasons why consumers buy what they buy. Next, try and explain the pre-purchase, purchase, and post-purchase activities that consumers engage in when making decisions. Thirdly, you should have understood or be able to explain how internal factors influence consumers' decision-making processes and apply these factors to the purchase of a product. Fourth, you need to understand how situational factors at the time and place of purchase may influence consumer behavior. 5, explain how consumers' relationships with other people influence their decision-making processes. And finally, hopefully you'll be able to explain how the internet offers consumers opportunities for consumer-to-consumer marketing. Okay, well that's it for consumer behavior theory. Hopefully you've enjoyed this talk. Hopefully you've enjoyed the discussion. That's it for today. This is Dr. Andrew Hughes signing out from the 181st floor of the ANU Research School of Management headquarters here in Acton, Canberra, ACT. Until next time, it's goodbye from me.